In the last few minutes, Pakistan says that the United States and Iran have reached a peace deal. The accord is set to be signed in Switzerland on the 19th of June. Donald Trump has said as well that the peace deal has been reached. He says Hormuz will be open, let the oil flow. Iran has now responded as well, saying that they forced the US into the peace deal and it will be implemented from this evening. We'll have all the latest with Noga Tanopolsky in Jerusalem and David Smith, the Washington's Guardian bureau chief. Welcome to the World Roundup Show. Pakistan says a breakthrough has been achieved. Prime Minister Shebhaz Sharif has announced that the United States and Iran have reached a peace agreement. He's declared an imminent, immediate and permanent end to military operations across all fronts, including Lebanon, with a formal signing ceremony scheduled this Friday in Switzerland, June 19th. Donald Trump has now also confirmed the deal is complete. He cited in the Wall Street Journal as saying that Iran had agreed not to obtain nuclear weapons, the Strait of Hormuz would reopen, and the US naval blockade would be lifted. Trump has declared, let the oil flow. Now on state news, Tehran has signaled its approval. State media claiming Iran forced Washington to accept the agreement. Officials there saying a ceasefire announcement will start tonight. Maritime traffic in the Gulf will be coordinated with Oman, and details of the Memorandum of Understanding will be released after the formal signing. They've also stressed the agreement does not imply trust in the United States. Let's get more with Noga Tanopolsky straight away. Noga, just tell me, what do you imagine the feeling is from the side of the Israelis?
Oh, I think for the side of Israelis, we know that there's been tremendous anger today, and there's quite a lot of fear. For the Israelis, the contents of this memorandum of understanding or peace deal, whatever it is going to turn out to be, is so far unknown. Israel was not part of this negotiation at all, but is implicated in it, of course. We do know another detail from a New York Times report from Iranian government sources. Iran now says that it has called off its planned attack on Israel tonight. So what we see is Iran basically declaring victory with certain important details. For example, it is now asserting its own sovereign rights over what was before the war international waters in the Strait of Hormuz. It is claiming to have a new cooperation with Oman, a country with which it hasn't always had good ties. And it has imposed on the United States basically its vision for how Lebanon should be run, including the insertion, possibly, with some kind of legitimacy of Hezbollah that the Lebanese government has been trying to get rid of. So this is a very big deal for Iran. From the Iranian side, we have no comment thus far either on curtailing its ballistic missiles that have caused Israel and all of the Gulf states tremendous harm, or about any curtailing of its nuclear program. Now, Donald Trump's statement is a bit of a trick, because what he said is that the Iranians have agreed not to pursue nuclear weapons. That, in fact, is what Iran has asserted all along for decades. Nonetheless, international authorities, especially the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, claimed that they were indeed pursuing nuclear weapons, lying about it. And the Obama plan from now 11 years ago, known as the JCPOA, the famous nuclear deal with Iran, is the only thing that did curtail Iran's gallop ahead to at least get to become a borderline nuclear weapon nation. That was, the deal was abandoned by Donald Trump with the urging of Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2018. And those were just the only 3 years in which Iran really was held back and also was scrutinized by international authorities. The situation now appears to be something of a Wild West, with no commitment on the Iranian part regarding its ballistic missiles, new powers over this all-important Strait of Hormuz, and absolutely nothing of substance regarding its nuclear programs. I just want to say again, we have had no comment from the Israeli government, but for Israel and separately for Netanyahu, this is a very, very bad night.
A very bad night. Let's just touch on what you just talked about with nuclear with David Smith. David, there was a Wall Street Journal article citing what Donald Trump's intentions were with the deal ahead of it being announced. And it said that Trump would require that nuclear was part of it and they would have to dismantle their nuclear program, but there was no rush. He said basically that any agreement from Iran to obtain nuclear weapons would be included. Sorry, let me just rephrase that. He said that the deal would include an agreement from Iran not to obtain nuclear weapons and an immediate opening of Hormuz. But he also expressed no urgency to extract nuclear material from Iran, saying that that would come later. The devil's always in the detail. We carry on saying this. Do we imagine that that was in any kind of agreement?
Well, yes, we will have to keep imagining. We don't know for sure yet. We haven't seen the details, and I think this memorandum, which effectively just really extends the ceasefire rather than being a fully fleshed out peace deal, may well not delve into too many of those details. Even though, of course, from the beginning, Donald Trump has, he's given various explanations for this war when it launched, but the central one appears to have been ensuring Iran never has a nuclear weapon. And here in Washington on Sunday, some of Trump's allies, Republicans in the Senate, were trying to make the case that Barack Obama was only postponing Iran's nuclear program, whereas Trump will make sure it never, ever happens. However, media reporting around the negotiations in recent weeks suggest it'll be impossible to block it forever, that so much of the infrastructure is still in place, so much of the expertise is still in Iran, despite the US claims of destroying many facilities. In fact, many are intact. And I think we're still going to see stumbling blocks, for example, over the enriched uranium or nuclear dust, as Donald Trump calls it. Obviously, on the American side, they would love all of it to be removed or suitably down-blended, as they say. Iran, I think, is going to haggle over that and perhaps agree to a slower schedule or for some of the material to be removed. But all these points remain in play in the coming weeks, and so. Well, I think you will see Trump trying to take a victory lap tonight at his birthday celebration. In fact, the hard negotiations are still to come, with the potential for this conflict to flare up again.
That's exactly the point which it feels like we've landed on with Iran's deputy foreign minister. Let me just take this to Noga right now, David. Thank you so much, because we've heard from him. He seems to be the mouthpiece right now of Iran on this deal. He says that negotiations for a final deal will be held in a period of 60 days. And that just feels like we are kicking the can down the road ever so slightly. He says the 60-day period negotiations will focus on ending sanctions. And basically that once those sanctions are lifted, that's when negotiations will really start in earnest. But for now, the fighting stops. Your take?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Noga, sorry.
Look, this is a zero commitment victory for Iran. There are few other ways to spin it. We don't know what Iran will or won't be willing to give, but moreover, we don't know whether Trump will have any interest in resolving this very, very sticky, very difficult nuclear problem within 60 days. He will definitely be deeply enmeshed in the midterms by then, and any hint of a return to war in Iran, to again possible a spike in American gas prices, petrol prices. We also don't know how fast those prices will be able to go down, given the depth of the production and distribution problems caused by this blockage. We don't know what will happen in the Strait of Hormuz, and we don't know what will happen with Hezbollah. Will they hold their fire this time, or will they continue shooting at Israel, with Israel responding, while Iran claims to say, well, we're in a deal with the United States and everything is fine. This is not that different a deal from what we saw 2 months ago, and we saw how that quickly unraveled. So again, we have to see, but Donald Trump may want to simply turn around to other issues now. He has hinted, he and his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that they may want to turn to Cuba next. President Trump may be distracted or simply not wish to return to this issue. And again, that would leave Israel and the Gulf states, but Israel definitely exposed to Iran's nuclear threats and to its ballistic missiles.
David, as we're speaking, Noga mentioned oil. It has now slipped 4% after that announcement. It's reached early March levels. Is this Donald Trump's perfect gift to himself?
I guess so. American consumers have been hurting because of oil, but so have markets around the world, and they'll be grateful for any sign of stability here. A more big picture point, I think some critics have said actually Donald Trump's real gift to the world here is he's underlined the importance of renewable energy, solar and wind and so on, because when you depend so much on somewhere like the Strait of Hormuz or on other countries which are often authoritarian, the oil price, you're at their mercy. So that's one of the lessons here. I think also worth noting, of course, in his social media post, the Prime Minister of Pakistan talked about an official signing ceremony happening in Switzerland on Friday, the 19th of June. There's some reporting in the US now that Vice President J.D. Vance might be there, or perhaps Donald Trump himself might go, again, to enjoy the theater of this. But yes, still so many issues will be unresolved, whether it's the nuclear program, whether it's the future of the Strait of Hormuz, and whether Iran, having gained the knowledge of just how much power it has there, will try to levy tolls on shipping. And I think both Trump and Netanyahu will face tough questions from their own citizens about what did you actually gain from this war. The list of gains is quite short, but the list of negatives include so many civilians killed, so much money spent, so much damage, including to other countries in the region that came under attack from Iran, and now not even a hint of regime change in Iran. Even Trump no longer talks about that. That goal has been abandoned, and that's a terrible failure for Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, of course.
Noga, that terrible failure is not only being felt by Netanyahu and his camp, but also by the Iranians, which Trump vowed to defend earlier on in the year. And I just wonder if you can take us into the minds of those people right now. I mean, I know it must be a bit difficult to venture there, but now they're hearing all of this and peace has been agreed upon. Obviously, no fighting means no death, but what else does it bring with it?
Well, it may mean a different sort of death. Iran is in the midst of numerous crises, including a water crisis, including an economic and financial crisis. Things are not yet easy. We have crucially not yet heard about what Iranian assets may be unfrozen, how many billions of dollars may flow into Iran. This whole afternoon here was rife with rumors about really money that the United States might have been dangling over Iran while it was trying to persuade Iran not to attack Israel tonight. Actual cash reward for not attacking Israel tonight. So there's a lot that we don't know about. And I think for the people of Iran, the biggest memory, I think the two things that they will remember are, forgive me for saying this, but Donald Trump's lie, his promise, help is on its way, which turned out to be the hollowest of promises. And then the fact that they were cut off from the world, this more than 2-month-long internet cutoff for young Iranians. It's a young country in Iran, very well connected, very technologically advanced. And, it was thrown back several eras by the government's ability to simply cut them off from the world. There's also been a tremendous crackdown against anyone, even remotely presenting or presenting a different view or questioning the government. So I think that this is at least for some people in Iran, it will be a huge relief, at least not to have bombs falling. But for many, it will also be a moment of heartbreak, of realizing that there really is no one who is going to help them unless they find help from within.
A very somber take there, Noga, but absolutely realistic, unfortunately. On the flip side of that, David, I'm sure we're going to be expecting huge celebrations outside the White House lawns just in a couple of hours. I know it's quite a jarring juxtaposition, but Donald Trump, I mean, we can probably expect him to gloat on about the fact that he's reached peace in front of all of his supporters there at the UFC event tonight.
I'd have thought so, and Donald Trump does specialize in jarring juxtapositions. We've seen plenty of them, and this was already a bizarre one. The hallowed turf of the White House South Lawn, a place of so many dignified occasions, but tonight we have some cage fighting coming up, United Fighting Championships, which is this kind of blood sport, men belting each other, very red-blooded, aggressive, violent stuff with a crowd roaring them on. Also fears of humidity, of lots of bugs or even mosquitoes in the air. And I'm looking out of my window here because there have been predictions of thunderstorms, but no sign of those yet. And so in the midst of all that, to be talking about a very somber moment in the Iran war, it will be strange. But yes, I'm sure Trump will revel in it and try to spin this as a great victory for the US military and his own diplomacy, and maybe treat that as a watershed and hope that Americans and the media narrative then shifts to other issues which suits him better as the midterm elections hove into view. But yeah, it's quite a way to spend his 80th birthday night.
Noga, I see you smirking there, just imagining this all unfold. We're in a new phase of politics, aren't we?
We are. I'm not really smirking, but I'm thinking that this cage fight, in a way, is a metaphor for the way global politics is working right now. Men whacking each other without any clear sense of purpose. Of course, for Netanyahu, the continuation of this war and his ability to continue declaring that he's defending Israeli security interests completely contradicted Donald Trump's increasingly urgent need to get this war over with and to say that he ended a war ahead of the midterms. Hard to know if it will really help him, given the polls that we're seeing and the doubts that many of his own voters are having about Donald Trump. I'm thinking in particular about Latino voters in the United States that really swung hard for Donald Trump and now appear to have swung as hard against him. We can't guess, but we think, we have to think that this may not work. They may not have the time to work. For Netanyahu, who faces elections under law by October 27th, so earlier than the U.S. midterms, and these are not midterms for Netanyahu. This will be a re-election bid, assuming the elections go forth. This will be a very, very difficult argument to make.
A shockingly difficult argument, I would imagine. But Netanyahu is the perennial survivor in politics, as Donald Trump has seemed to be. If I could just let our audience revive and, just rehash the moment where Pakistan announced this ceasefire. I do believe we have that official statement by their Prime Minister. We can just play it for you. This is what was announced just a couple of minutes ago.
Following intensive talks, we are pleased to announce that the peace deal between the United States of America and Islamic Republic of Iran has been reached. Both sides have declared the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon. The official signing ceremony will be on Friday, the 19th of June, in Switzerland.
We can now turn to Nega Motavari, political commentator, Iranian-American political commentator. She joins us over the phone. And as always, Nega, thank you so much because you can provide some fresh insight. Just a first reaction to this deal being reached.
Well, it's, a surprise as in the timing, although they haven't signed yet. So the caveat is that the date of the signing is announced as Friday. But it was, very difficult work. It is a somewhat historic deal with a historic role played by Pakistan. It was reached in very difficult times during wartime with escalations. Just today, Israeli escalation in Lebanon, which was very much aimed at sabotaging the process, but nevertheless they pushed through. And so I think they're ready for the next stage, which is going to be even more difficult and complicated because this is not everything. This is just an end to the war. As they say, the permanent end to the war, regional as Iran had wanted it to be. And then there will be another period of 2 months where they will discuss further the nuclear program, sanctions relief, and else. But this seems to be a very significant moment.
Nega, what do you think was the defining moment that actually brought these warring parties together? What has changed in the past 24 hours even that both sides, America and Iran and mediators Pakistan, have now all of a sudden sung from the exact same hymn sheet?
I'm not sure if anything specific happened in the past 24 hours. This has been sort of a process in the making, and until the last moment they were hashing out the details. But I think overall, if we look at the trajectory of this war, what happened is that President Trump, with conviction, and pressure from Israel, went into this war thinking that this would be a cakewalk, that this would be regime change, fast and easy. Iran would be something similar to another Venezuela. And, that was the whole rhetoric, destroying their army, destroying their navy. And I think over the 3 months trajectory, what Iran showed is that, yes, they were the underdog, attacked by 2 world superpowers, nuclear powers with military supremacy, but they also had their own cards to play. They launched an asymmetric defense. They opened new fronts in this war. Their allies joined them in Lebanon, in Iraq, from Yemen. And the Iranians also had control over the Strait of Hormuz, which I think was the defining point in this war, that strategic geographic advantage that Iran has over the Strait of Hormuz. And it seems like President Trump and the U.S. just couldn't get them to reopen the strait with force. And so this brought them really to the negotiating table. And essentially, I would say this is back to square one because the Strait of Hormuz wasn't even a problem before the war. It was a problem created by this war. So none of the goals of the war have been achieved, the stated goals by the U.S. and Israel. And in fact, a new problem was created, and now that goal is achieved as far as resolving this problem. So this brings us to a point that I would say the majority of the global community and regional neighbors have been making, that this war was so pointless and there was no need for so much violence and destruction if you wanted to just go back to square one and start negotiating a nuclear deal.
A very good point there, Nega. Let's take that to David Smith. David, what Nega's saying there is that the status quo has now been changed where it need not have, because especially with the Strait of Hormuz, the United States very much not coming out with the best reputation, what they've done to world markets, and now setting a precedent as well for countries taking control of geographical regions like Iran has done, and especially when they're backed in the corner, doing it quite effectively, because now they, as we have come to a consensus, have coerced the United States into agreeing possibly more unfavorable terms than they otherwise would have.
Yes, I've heard that comparison made. For example, could the Houthis take control of certain areas with the use of drones? Will other groups around the world now realize that they do have these choke points over global energy markets, and even when they're relatively small in terms of military might, they can have an outsized impact? Because I think one of the lessons the world will be taking from the last few months is that not even the Goliaths of the world are all conquering the United States through tremendous firepower at this. And of course, we heard those rather bombastic briefings from Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, or styles himself as Secretary of War, claiming total annihilation, that there was massive destruction on the Iranian side. And yet Iran proved resilient and was still able to attack countries in the region, still protect its missile centers, and to this day is still the regime is still in place. And so the US, I think, has set some worrying precedents here. It is like, in that sense, Russia and Ukraine, showing the limitations of power. The only thing that could have changed the calculus, of course, would have been if Donald Trump had actually sent in ground troops. And politically, that was never on the cards. His own support base remembers well, particularly the Iraq war and also how long things took in Afghanistan. And I think Iran was always aware of that calculation. They were following the domestic dynamics of this. They could see the unpopularity of this war among Trump's own supporters. They're aware he's under pressure with midterm elections, and so they were happy to run down the clock. And yes, this Strait of Hormuz example does set a very worrying precedent now for other parts of the world. And as I was touching on earlier, perhaps will encourage some countries to pursue green energy instead, which is not similarly vulnerable.
Green energy is something that I would love to get to, but I think Donald Trump is going to talk about that at the G7 summit coming up here in France. But as this situation moves, we do have another fresh voice. Tara Kangaloo, global affairs journalist and author of The Heartbeat of Iran, a very popular guest here on the World Roundup show and on France 24. Tara, thank you so much. Just a first reaction in terms of what you imagine the people of Iran are feeling right now.
Excellent question. And in fact, I'm looking down because I'm getting messages from sources and friends and contacts in Iran. And this is from a longtime source of mine. He's also a journalist. And he said, we never thought that Donald Trump nor the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu truly care about the Iranian people. But there was a moment where we thought that their interests have aligned with the interests of the Iranian people, and that is to move beyond the Islamic regime of Iran and essentially to get rid of this regime. But today, Donald Trump's tweet and the confirmation from the Pakistani officials and also the Islamic regime officials tell us that that is not the case. And this, again, in the words of the source of mine just moments ago, guaranteed the longevity of the regime in Iran. And so many people in Iran, of course, will wake up disappointed because what happened during the course of this 40-plus day active war, a war that has continued to over 107 days today, of course, has served as essentially an adversity to their already crippling economy that they were struggling with prior to the war, where a police state is now governing with a regime and a hardline apparatus that is more emboldened than before. So life for ordinary Iranians in Iran is worse than how it was in the beginning of this war against a collapsed economy. And they're left with a younger, more emboldened Khamenei regime. And this is not what they wanted and asked the world for. But I think once again, we're reminded that countries don't have friends, rather interests. And Donald Trump showed that his interests are not aligned with that of the people of Iran.
Tara, thank you so much. We'll stay with you, but let's just go to Nega first. Nega, we're talking about optics just quickly in terms of Iran's legitimacy and that new emboldened young regime under the new Ayatollah who has remained conspicuous by his absence. I just wonder now, what kind of message is going to be sent on the streets of Tehran, and also what is that going to say to Iran's regional neighbors?
Well, it depends on who you ask on the streets of Iran. Of course, the entirety of the state has this new gained confidence. And this really solidified them as, the only country in the region that can fight two superpowers who came for an overthrow. And they were able to essentially defend the sovereignty, the independence, the system, and bring these superpowers to the negotiating table in 3 months. That's very much a narrative that they're telling themselves, and it's not wrong. But internally also, because the war is not just on one front, it's not just kinetic. There's also economic war on Iran by the U.S., severe U.S. sanctions, and that has really devastated the Iranian economy. It hasn't resulted in any policy change, but it has really made life difficult for middle-class, working-class Iranians. The government needs to deal with that, and they haven't yet. So post-war, if there isn't economic relief coming out of these negotiations and translating into the everyday life of the Iranians, those grievances are going to remain. We see protest after protest with economic, political, social grievances that the state has to answer. The divide between state and society, that gap, that widening gap, is something that they need to answer. That was put on hold. That form of dissent and protest was put on hold despite the rhetoric coming from Israel and the U.S. that the Iranians are going to rise up when we come from the sky. They will rise up and overthrow the system or the regime. That didn't happen, but it doesn't mean dissent isn't there. So that was put on pause. And what this war did, in fact, which was interesting, is they created more nationalism in the country, a rally around the flag for supporters of the Islamic Republic, the system, but also among the ordinary people, a lot of opposition to the status quo. It increased nationalism because people realized that these quote-unquote freedom bombs or help coming to the Iranian people wasn't really helping. The war started by attacking a school full of elementary-aged children. Hospitals, universities, 2/3 of the targets have been civilian infrastructure, thousands dead in Iran, thousands in Lebanon. So the war has just been very devastated for civilians, and people who are not clear-eyed about how there isn't such thing as a surgical war that can come and magically just assassinate and change a regime and go, are now realizing that no, war is very much devastating for civilians more than actual governments. And so I think that rise in nationalism is something that the state, you know, if they're wise, can capitalize on and try to sort of reduce that gap between state and society and then really address the grievances. If not, there's just going to be more dissent, more protests, resurfacing, and just more anger at the government.
That's what we can possibly expect if the situation doesn't improve economically, and also those sanctions relief. We don't know, as you keep on saying, and as we've heard from Noga as well, we have no idea what is entailed in that sanctions relief and if it may come to pass the way that the Iranians want. Noga, let me just go back to you because we are now over an hour since Pakistan announced the end of the fighting, and we have still not heard from Israel as far as I can see.
Absolutely not. We haven't. We have not heard a word from Israel, from any Israeli figure. And again, the United States appears to have signed on, including on Israel's behalf. If I understood Donald Trump's message correctly, this is going to imply a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. He does not say an end to fighting in Beirut. He said an end of all military operations in Lebanon. This could have very serious implications. This will have serious implications for Israel. And I think that once again, in these very bumpy few weeks, we see an Israeli government that simply doesn't know how to handle it. I would like to add one more thing. Prime Minister Netanyahu has gotten himself mixed up with personal and national issues regarding Donald Trump. You may remember that back in January, he asked Donald Trump to help push a pardon for him. That hasn't prospered. Netanyahu continues to be on trial, but as the trial advances, he seems more and more intent to get that pardon. Israel doesn't have a pardon system like the United States, but of course the support of the President of the United States is a massive boon to him. And if he's now lost that, or on the other hand, if he now still needs help from Trump, this will impact most likely how Netanyahu responds to this very bad, hand of cards that he's been handed tonight.
Well, so much to digest there, Noga. I do wonder, if this could be the final nail in the proverbial political coffin of Netanyahu. But again, we carry on saying this. I want to take this back to Tara. We've got word that Hormuz will be reopening on Friday after the deal is signed. That is directly from Donald Trump. But we're also talking about what this new look Hormuz is going to be like. In fact, even as late as yesterday, Iran said that it would still keep its sword over the Strait of Hormuz. And now it's saying that it is going to be directly coordinating with Oman for full traffic control, if we can say. Just what are we looking at in terms of the authorities, and how is Hormuz going to be managed from now on?
Important question. And again, I'm looking as the news is coming in from all sides, including Iranian state media and Iranian officials. A few things for us to remember from this very moment that we're speaking. By the way, I don't know if you talked about this earlier, but Donald Trump just turned 80 years old, and this announcement, I'm sure he will be making a big deal out of it in the coming hours as he is set to talk on this occasion. But to that point, in his tweet, very interestingly, he said the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the Iranians will argue that, Mr. President, this is not up to you. And some may argue that Trump can say whatever he wants to say, but the reality may differ from his statement. Because as you mentioned, the Iranians, along with the Omani government, want to create a new architecture when it comes to the movement around the Strait of Hormuz. And in fact, the foreign minister of Iran, Araghchi, in his live state interview, less than 24 hours ago, he said that along with Oman, Iran will issue a statement as to what this new mechanism will look like. Of course, we have not yet received or rather seen this new statement, and details of that are yet to be revealed. But I don't imagine we will go back to a situation of what Hormuz and the transport and movement around this choke point look like prior to this war. But I think, again, we need to remember that both sides, whether it be the United States or Iran, want to project power. They want to show force. They want to reflect that they have the upper hand and flex their muscles. And I think that's what we're reading in these rhetorics and these sentiments. Also, mind you, that from now until Friday, where this deal is presumably going to be signed in Switzerland, a country that was host to the previous agreement between Iran and the United States in 2015, there's a whole lot that can happen in this 6 or 7 days. And of course, the important bit and the hard part will start after that, which is the second phase of this deal, and that's 60 days that will presumably discuss Iran's nuclear program and the issue of sanctions that is perhaps pivotal, the most pivotal to the Islamic regime of Iran, the lifting of sanctions, and of course, the unfreezing of its $24 billion frozen assets.
David Smith, 6 days and then another 60 is a lot of time for something to go wrong yet again. How precarious are we, even though all three parties, including the mediators, Pakistan, have now said that a deal has been reached?
Oh, I think it's tremendously fragile. There's still a lot that could go wrong. You're just waiting for one military skirmish to spiral out of control, or some diplomatic blunder along the line. Just listening to the others, my mind went back to the start of this war, when Donald Trump delivered that speech. It came out around midnight, and he talked about this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the regime. And I think Trump's critics will now just say how glib that was, how naive, just how little understanding of the region. Some of those critics will wonder, why was this action not taken a few months earlier when the Iranian people were in the streets protesting? Because the upshot of it all, of course, is that early in the war, a school was hit and children died. There've been other civilian casualties. The Iranian people are worse off at the end of this, and everyone else is worse off too. And it does seem a huge military and diplomatic folly on so many levels. And that includes this increasingly fraught relationship now between the US and Israel. Of course, it's been a fairly wild 24 hours, including that Israeli attack on Lebanon, and Trump calling Netanyahu and once again using some foul language to describe him, and just the tension there, and Trump trying to make this point that I helped keep you out of jail, he's been saying in recent weeks. So the personal favors just really, it feels like it's unraveling, and I think that will continue to underpin the process in the coming weeks. Trump, I suspect, will try to wash his hands of this now and delegate it to some of his other officials, and hope attention turns elsewhere. But yeah, just one flashpoint away from the whole thing flaring up again.
David, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go, but I just want to expand on what David was just talking about. We do have now officially that Truth Social post by Donald Trump saying that the great deal will bring peace and security to the whole region. We're going to get this up right now. He says, many presidents have tried to make peace with Iran, and all have failed before me. The leaders of the region have, for the first time, found a president who can help them achieve real peace. With the opening of the Strait of upon the signing of the deal on Friday, for purposes of mine removal, oil will flow on both ends again for the region and the world. President Donald J. Trump. Noga, just if I could get a final reaction from you for the night. What a night it has been.
Absolutely. And, you know, we should note no previous American president has tried to make peace with the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was never on the table. And there was also never an actual war between the United States and Iran necessitating peace before this. Iran has always been viewed as, I would say, threshold nuclear state that is increasingly dangerous. That was the aim of President Obama's joint plan of action to try and curb, and successfully curbed, Iran's nuclear ambitions. It didn't go beyond that, but it did succeed in that. And now it seems as if we have an unrestrained Iran that is going to be allowed to move forward. Donald Trump has zero achievements to show for this war. In fact, he's handed the control over the Strait of Hormuz to the Iranians, and it appears increasingly clear that he will hand over at least quite a significant number of billions of dollars to Iran in seized assets. This doesn't even take into account the sanctions relief Iran is demanding, and Iran is even demanding compensation for war damage. And Israel will find itself with equal or greater threats from Iran, and equal and continuing threats around its various borders that was supposed to have been resolved. So, as David said, it's a very fragile situation. I will just say, in terms of the ongoing negotiations that are supposed to start within 60 days, I don't think there are any guarantees of that right now. And Donald Trump may end up just satisfied to have the Strait of Hormuz opened, even if it involves tolls to Iran, and just want to move on.
So a peace or a negative peace at that. Noga, thank you so much. Now I'm going to let you go and just finish off with Tara Kangaroo, because Tara, we are just getting information from Iran's MEHR on the Memorandum of Understanding, MER news agency. And they say on that memorandum, there is a necessity for US and its allies to present reconstruction plans for Iran amounting to at least $300 billion.
There we go. And this is something, by the way, that Donald Trump said in between his lines just a few days ago, that Iran would need a reconstruction. And there is a whole lot of investment, potential investment to be made there. And this is just fascinating, because if we look at history and we look at that entire region, and I'm going to take Syria as an example, that entire country was destroyed over the course of over a decade, nearly 15 years. And right now, many people, many states, many countries are investing there, and will make a whole lot of money off the back of innocent people and innocent civilians who've lost their livelihood in a war that, quite frankly, did not make sense to them, in a regime that we still don't know much about, being led by a former, Al-Qaeda militant. And right now we are seeing a regime in Iran that, as I said, is more emboldened and more hardline, consolidated by an IRGC, that is essentially governing in a police state fashion off the back of innocent Iranian civilians who risk their lives on the street, telling the world that we want to move beyond this regime, that we are not happy with the current conditions of our lives. And so this regime has stayed, and Donald Trump is presumably interested in making a peace with this same regime. So anytime we hear him say the regime has changed, we need to be reminded that that is not the case, and the price has been paid for ordinary people. And we need to ask, was this war worth it? And if so, for who? And that goes back to your question of investment. And possibly, maybe we would see a deal where a day when the United States would make investments in Iran. And we have to ask ourselves, who would that benefit? Would that benefit the people of Iran or the Islamic regime that has stayed? And in the words of, again, a source of mine that I spoke with before coming on the program, is now more emboldened and more vicious and angrier than ever before.
Tara Kangalu, thank you on those words. And just a final update, Iran's MEHR once again saying that the draft Iran-US Memorandum of Understanding calls for the release of $24 billion in Iranian blocked funds before negotiations can continue. So that is where we wrap up this edition. Thank you to all my guests. Thank you to all my analysts. And I will see you soon here for more here on the World Roundup Show on France 24.